Hello, my name is Marcelo Neri, and this is my evidence for Module 3, which is an audiovisual presentation reflecting the transformation of society in regards to the unipolar transition, globalization, digital technology, and the importance of knowledge. First of all, I will list and briefly describe important events of the last decades, from the crisis of the socialist bloc until today, the digital era. One event I would like to emphasize on is the one in which the Apollo 13 landed on Earth safely. Uh, the Apollo 13 spacecraft was intended to be the third landing on the moon, but the NASA crew aborted its mission after an oxygen tank exploded on board. So the astronauts landed in South Pacific on April 17 of the year 1970. Here in this picture, the lunar model pilot Fred W. Hayes Jr. is about to be hoisted up to a recovery helicopter from the USS Iowa Jima. The reason I chose this event was because the Apollo 13 accident was nearly catastrophic. Only outstanding performances by the crew and ground support personnel and excellent performance of the LM system made a safe return possible. And also, I chose this event because the Apollo 13 accident helped the NASA evolution in a way that in their future space travels they would be more safe and it wouldn't cause more trouble with oxygen and ignitions and so. Another event I would like to talk about is the first attempt assassination of Pope John Paul II, which took place on Wednesday, May 13, 1981, in St. Peter's Square at Vatican City. The Pope was shot and wounded by Mehmet Ali Agha while he was entering the square. The Pope was struck 4 times and suffered severe blood loss. Agha was apprehended immediately and later sentenced to life, imprisoned by an Italian court. The Pope later forgave Agha for the assassination attempt. He was pardoned by Italian President Ciampi and the Pope's request and was deported to Turkey in June 2000. I chose this event mainly because Pope John Paul II is remembered for his successful efforts to end communism, as well as for building bridges with peoples of other faiths and using the Catholic Church's first apology for its actions during the World War II. Another event that I would like to talk about, even though I already mentioned it several times, is the fall of the Berlin Wall. And mostly I would like to talk about it because it's one of my personal favorite events of history. And I think that it's one of the most interesting ones because it symbolized the difference between the Western Democrats and the Eastern Communists and the way they thought Germany should be led. So it was like forced to be that way, and people wouldn't be able to change their mind, and it had to be that way. But the Germany stood, and they I don't know, they began to realize they didn't want to live under the rule of the Soviet Union and communism. So they started to leave the eastern part of the country and move to the west. And to those people, they were called the defectors. On November 9 of the year 1989, the announcement was made. The borders were open and people could freely move between Eastern and Western Germany. Much of the wall was torn down by people chipping away as they celebrated the end of the divided Germany, and on October 3, 1990, Germany was officially reunited into a single country. The last event I would like to talk about is the death of Osama bin Laden. In a daring raid 120 miles inside Pakistan, a team of U.S. Special Forces flew from Afghanistan to bin Laden's hiding place in the dead of night. They swooped down on the compound in stealth helicopters, swept through the buildings within the high-walled enclosure, and shot dead a total of 5 people, including bin Laden. The reason I chose this event was because it has many doubts, and many people in the internet made comments that it isn't true, many theories, controversy, that he isn't dead, that it's all just like the government of the US is just hiding everything, that he's still alive, that it wasn't a real body, and so and so. So that's why I chose this event because mainly it has a lot of controversy. Now that I've done with describing the important events of the last decades, I would like to describe the following terms, which are globalization, terrorism, unipolar world, and digital era. The first term explained will be the globalization, which is a process of interaction and integration among the people, companies, and governments of different nations, a process driven by international trade and investment and aided by informational technology. This process has effects on the environment, on culture, on political systems, on economic development and prosperity, and on human physical well being in societies around the world, which, in few words, is a worldwide movement toward economic, financial, trade, and communications integrations. Now, why did the globalization emerge? Well, basically because of the need of exchanging products and goods, and also because taking the good thing in one country and sharing it with another will make the society more easier to evolve and to adapt or something like that. It's like, for example, well, I use the example of a friend or mm, yeah, friend sharing food or homework or research or so, and sharing with another fellows or so he can know more, and they both kept winning. Now let's talk about terrorism. Well, the term terrorism is defined as the use of violence to achieve a political goal. It is either to establish a government or to destroy one, to establish a state or to create one, or to destroy a state. It adopts a way of striking terror either by kidnapping, sexual assault, bombing, striking, or any form in order to intimidate the government to succumb to their demands. Now, in most cases, what caused the terrorist attacks of 20th century? Well, nations became closely tied to concepts of race and ethnicity. International political developments began to support such concepts. Members of ethnic groups whose state had been absorbed by others or had ceased to exist as separate nations saw opportunities to realize national ambitions. Several of these groups chose terror as a method to conduct their struggle and make their situation known to the world powers they hoped would be sympathetic. So they basically formed for the need to prove three things: encourage empathy for their unfair or unjust situation and sympathy for the cause, demonstrate the inability of the state to provide security, and demonstrate the illegitimacy of the state's institution. Leaving terrorism behind, let's talk about the unipolar world. Well, basically, it describes the distribution of power in which there is one state with most of the cultural, economic, and military influence. This is also called a very interesting question is how does the end of the Cold War relate with the unipolar world? Well, basically, the end of the Cold War meant that the previous decade's superpower rivalry was over. There was no longer the traditional East versus West conflict, which, in few words, we're talking about the USA versus the USSR, at least not the way it had been earlier in the 20th century. There used to be two different powers, and at the end of the rivalry, there would only be one. And last but not least, let's talk about the digital era. The digital era is characterized by technology which increases the speed and breadth of knowledge turnover within the economy and society. The digital era can be seen as a development of an evolutionary system in which knowledge turnover is not only very high, but also increasingly out of the control of humans, making it a time in which our lives become more difficult to manage. Now, let's talk about how has the digital era influenced today's society. Well, basically in every aspect of our lives, we have TV, computers, cell phones, tablets, and so. We can't live without them. They are part of our daily routine nowadays, making life easier than it was before, giving us first-hand information and data. As I already said, life would be completely different without technology. We, today, are able to communicate with someone who is at the other side of the world. Technology is amazing, but we really need to learn how to use it wisely. So, this is my evidence for Module 3. My name is Marcelo Neri, and hope you enjoyed it.